The jungle planet of Zenthia was a nightmare for anyone not familiar with its harsh environment. Ryan Carter, captain of the 8th Expeditionary Unit, had been on many battlefields, but nothing could prepare him for the hellish landscape that now surrounded him. The dense, twisted trees seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky, their gnarled branches swaying like dark, skeletal hands reaching out for him. The ground was soft and treacherous, like quicksand, with strange, glowing mushrooms and alien flora that seemed to whisper in the wind. But it wasn't the jungle itself that was terrifying. It was the sound of war. Explosions rumbled through the air as Ryan's unit advanced cautiously through the undergrowth, their cloaking devices barely masking their presence. The enemy knew they were coming, and they were waiting. Ryan scanned his comms, checking for the signal from the Zerinthian Royal Guard that they were in range. The Zerinthian king was in trouble. Word had reached him just hours ago that the king had been ambushed by a faction of rogue Zerinthian exiles, led by a warlord who had gone rogue and started using AI-controlled warbits to eliminate any who stood against him. This warlord was ruthless, with no regard for life. His only goal was to seize power. He had even gone so far as to kidnap the Zerinthian king in an effort to demoralize the people. Ryan couldn't let that happen. The king was one of the few remaining leaders who could hold the galaxy together in these dangerous times. Ryan's team was small but highly skilled, made up of elite soldiers trained for covert missions. As they moved deeper into the jungle, the tension was palpable. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, set their nerves on edge. Ryan led the charge, his finger resting on the trigger, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. A sudden flash of light caught his attention, followed by the hum of high-energy weapons. A massive explosion shook the ground as one of his soldiers, Bonner, was blown back by a blast. "Bonner!" Ryan shouted into the comm, his heart racing. The sounds of gunfire echoed through the jungle as Ryan sprinted toward his fallen comrade, knowing that every second counted. He reached Bonner's side, only to find his soldier unconscious but alive. With a quick motion, he dragged Bonner to cover behind a massive, twisted tree. The air around them crackled as laser beams zipped through the air, narrowly missing their position. The rogue warlord's forces were everywhere, swarming in the shadows, hidden by cloaking tech and enhanced by the AI-driven warbits that moved with deadly precision. Ryan could hear them, mechanical footsteps that moved in eerie synchrony. They weren't just fighting to kill, they were fighting to send a message. And that message was clear. The human race was too weak to be trusted in the galaxy. Ryan's comm crackled again, this time with the voice of his second-in-command, Lieutenant Thompson. "Sir, we're surrounded. We need to move out. Now." Ryan's mind raced. The situation was getting worse by the second. They couldn't afford to stay where they were. If they didn't act fast, the Zerinthian king would fall into the hands of the warlord, and the galaxy would be thrown into chaos. Ryan had to think quickly, and then it hit him. There was only one way out. He had to break the trap. "Listen up," Ryan barked into his comm, rallying his soldiers. "We're going to create a diversion. Thompson, get the drones up. Disrupt their cloaking systems. Bonner, get the EMPs ready. I'll take point." As his team scrambled into position, Ryan turned to face the enemy. They were closing in fast, and the fight was inevitable. Ryan could hear the faint hum of the cloaked warbits as they neared. They would be on top of him in seconds. Ryan gritted his teeth. He had no choice. He activated his cloaking device, blending into the environment just as the first warbot appeared through the brush. The massive mechanical beast was like something out of a nightmare. Gleaming metal, glowing red eyes, and a deadly arsenal mounted on each of its 4 limbs. Ryan's heart pounded as he waited for the perfect moment. The warbit's footsteps grew louder. He could feel its presence, its sensors scanning the area. He had to move, or he would be spotted. Just as the warbit's sensors swept over his position, Ryan fired his plasma rifle, sending a shot straight into the bot's exposed power core. The warbit staggered, sparks flying from its joints as it exploded into a ball of flame. Ryan didn't wait to see the aftermath. He moved fast, his boots crunching over the jungle floor as he ran toward the Zenthia king's last known location. Explosions continued to rock the battlefield as Ryan and his team fought their way forward. The warlord's forces weren't going down easily, but Ryan had something they didn't: human ingenuity. They may have had cloaking tech, but Ryan had his instincts, and that was what kept them alive. It didn't take long before Ryan reached the Zenthia king's crash site, a clearing in the jungle marked by the wreckage of a downed Zenthia transport ship. The king was there, surrounded by his royal guard, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The king's bodyguards were holding their ground, but it was clear they were losing. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning metal. Ryan didn't hesitate. He charged in, his plasma rifle blazing, taking out 2 warbits in quick succession. His soldiers followed, pushing forward in a coordinated attack that caught the enemy off guard. They were making progress, but the king was still in danger. Ryan ducked behind a fallen tree, his eyes scanning the battlefield for the king. There he was, standing tall, despite the chaos around him. He was injured, but still determined. The warlord's forces were closing in, and Ryan knew they needed to act fast. "King," Ryan shouted over the comm. "Get to the evac point now. We're getting you out of here." The king, his regal armor cracked and singed, nodded. "I owe you my life, Captain," he said, his voice gravelly from the smoke. "We must leave now." But just as they began to retreat, the warlord's personal ship descended from the sky, a massive, sleek vessel powered by AI. It hovered ominously above the clearing, sending shockwaves through the ground as it deployed more warbits to finish the job. Ryan's mind raced. There was no way they could outrun this force, not without a miracle. That's when it happened. The king, seeing Ryan's resolve, made a decision that would stun the galaxy. He turned to Ryan and said, "You have saved my life, human. I owe you more than just my life. I offer you a gift, a token of my gratitude." Ryan froze. "A gift?" he repeated, confused. "Yes," the king said, his tone firm. "I offer you my sister, Princess Amara. She is the greatest treasure of my people. She is yours, for saving me." Ryan's heart skipped a beat. The idea of receiving a living, breathing person as a gift was foreign and uncomfortable. He shook his head, trying to make sense of what the king had just said. I don't want her as a gift," Ryan stammered. "I didn't do this for any reward. I just wanted to save you." But the king's gaze hardened. "It is the custom of my people. You will have her. It is my debt to you." As the words sank in, Ryan realized he had no choice. He was now entangled in a galaxy-wide political game that would change everything. Ryan's mind was spinning as he stood there, staring at the Zenthia king. His words echoed in Ryan's head, the weight of them pressing on him like an unbearable burden. The king had just promised him his sister, Princess Amara, as a gift. The idea seemed impossible, unreal. Ryan had been part of countless dangerous missions, faced hostile forces, and seen death firsthand. But this was something else entirely. He was a soldier, a man of war, not a prince receiving a gift, especially not one like this. "Your Highness," Ryan began, trying to process what was happening. "I didn't come here for any reward. I did what I had to do to save you. You don't owe me anything." The king looked at him with a cold yet determined expression. "You saved my life, human. There is nothing more valuable in our culture than life itself. You have earned this gift." He gestured toward his sister, who stood a few feet behind him. Princess Amara, cloaked in regal Zenthia armor, was a vision of grace and strength, her piercing violet eyes meeting Ryan's with an emotionless stare. Ryan was still trying to wrap his head around the situation. This was a cultural exchange, one of honor and gratitude. But in his mind, it felt more like an impossible demand. He had no idea how to handle this kind of situation. He wasn't prepared to take a woman, a royal, no less, as some kind of prize. He wasn't even sure if he wanted to. But the king was insistent. "You will take her," the king said firmly. "It is the way of my people. You are not just a soldier, you are an honored guest now. I will not have my sister's life wasted. She will go with you, and in doing so, she will be under your protection." Amara stood still, silent as ever, her face unreadable. It was clear that she had been trained in the art of maintaining composure, no matter the situation. But Ryan could see the slight tension in her posture, the way her fingers clenched at her sides, betraying the calm exterior she was trying so hard to uphold. Ryan couldn't help but feel pity for her. She didn't deserve to be forced into this situation, to be treated like some kind of token for his victory. Before he could respond, a harsh voice interrupted him. "Captain, we need to go. Now." Lieutenant Thompson's voice crackled through his earpiece, sounding urgent. The warlord's forces were regrouping, and the massive AI-driven warbots were coming in for another attack. Ryan's heart pounded as he realized they were running out of time. He had to make a decision, one that would affect not just him, but the fate of an entire royal family. "Fine," Ryan said, his voice tight with frustration. "We'll take her." He turned to the princess. "I promise we'll get you out of here, princess. We're not your enemies." Amara's expression remained stoic, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps disbelief or even fear. She took a step forward, her armor clanking softly with the movement. "I'm not your prize to be won, human," she said, her voice cold but firm. "I am a royal, and I won't be treated as your property." Ryan couldn't blame her. The last thing he wanted was to be the cause of her humiliation, but in that moment, there was no choice. The enemy was closing in, and they needed to get to safety. The battlefield was no place for diplomacy or customs. "Let's go," Ryan ordered, his voice hardening. "We don't have time for this." With that, they moved out, Ryan leading the charge as the team made their way through the jungle, cloaking devices engaged. The sounds of distant explosions echoed behind them, and Ryan could feel the tension rising. The warlord's forces were relentless, and they wouldn't stop until they had the king and his sister. As they pushed forward, the landscape seemed to close in on them, the dense trees and alien flora acting as a natural barrier. They could only go forward. Amara kept pace with them, her footsteps light but deliberate. Ryan stole a glance at her as they ran, her features sharp and striking, her violet eyes glowing in the dim light of the jungle. There was something almost regal about her, despite the circumstances. But there was also something else, something deeper. She was clearly a woman of strength, someone who wasn't used to being told what to do. Ryan couldn't help but feel a strange connection to her, even though they were from completely different worlds. As they neared the extraction point, Ryan's thoughts raced. How could he protect her? How could he keep her safe when their enemies were everywhere? The truth was, he wasn't sure. He had no idea what he was getting himself into. The galaxy was full of political intrigue, and this situation with the princess was a perfect example of that. He wasn't just fighting a war now. He was caught in a web of royal politics, customs, and expectations. The Zenthia people would expect him to protect their princess at all costs, but what would that mean for him? And what would it mean for Amara, who was clearly not happy with this arrangement? Finally, they reached the extraction point, a small clearing where the shuttle awaited. But as they approached, Ryan's worst fears were realized. The warlord's forces had set up a perimeter. The massive AI warbots, towering machines with glowing red eyes, stood like sentinels, guarding the shuttle. There was no way they would make it past them. Ryan's mind raced, quickly formulating a plan. "We're not getting out that way," he muttered, scanning the area for any alternative routes. The jungle stretched out on all sides, but there was no cover, no escape route that didn't lead straight into the enemy's line of fire. "We're going to have to fight our way through," Ryan said, turning to his team. "We hold them off until we can get the shuttle to evac us. We'll take the fight to them." He looked at Amara, who stood beside him, her face hard with determination. She may not have wanted to be there, but she wasn't backing down. She was a warrior, in her own way, and she wasn't afraid to fight. Ryan could see that now. "I'm with you," she said, her voice steady. "Let's get this over with." Ryan nodded, impressed by her strength. There was no turning back now. They had to make it through this. They had no choice. The battle began almost immediately. The warbots advanced, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground as they opened fire. Ryan's team moved into position, weapons blazing, their cloaking devices flickering as they darted through the jungle. The warbots were powerful, but they weren't invincible. Ryan knew that if they could disable the leader, the rest would fall. Amara fought alongside them, her blade flashing as she cut through the enemies. She moved with a deadly grace, her training evident in every strike. Ryan couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for her. She was a princess, yes, but she was also a fighter, a warrior, just like him. As they pushed forward, Ryan felt the weight of the situation bearing down on him. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for honor, for duty, and for something much bigger than himself. The galaxy was at war, and he was in the middle of it. The battle raged on, explosions lighting up the jungle, sending shockwaves through the air. Ryan's heart raced as he fought, his focus on the task at hand. They couldn't afford to lose. Not now. Not with the princess in tow. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached the shuttle. The engines roared to life, and Ryan's team piled aboard, Amara following close behind him. The doors slammed shut, and they took off into the sky, leaving the jungle planet of Zenthia behind. Ryan leaned back in his seat, exhausted but relieved. He glanced over at Princess Amara, who stood silently beside him. Her eyes met his once again, and for a brief moment there was understanding between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond that had formed in the chaos of battle. But there was more to this journey than just survival. The royal gift had set things in motion that Ryan couldn't yet comprehend, and the galaxy, with all its politics and danger, was watching them both. The future, it seemed, was anything but predictable. The hum of the shuttle's engines filled the cabin as it cut through the cold vacuum of space, the stars outside twinkling like distant diamonds. Ryan sat silently, his thoughts consumed by the events of the last few hours. The battle had been fierce, and they had narrowly escaped with their lives. But even now, as the shuttle soared through the void, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken weight that seemed to press down on everyone aboard. It wasn't just the aftermath of battle. It was something deeper, something more dangerous. Princess Amara sat across from him, her gaze fixed on the stars outside, her expression unreadable. She hadn't said much since they had boarded the shuttle, her silence only adding to the unease that hung in the air. Ryan could see the strain in her posture, the way her shoulders were tense, as if she were still preparing for the next fight. She was a warrior, trained for combat, but there was more to her than just the physical strength she showed. The weight of her royal duty, the expectations of her people, was something Ryan could only begin to understand. "We're safe for now," Ryan said, trying to break the silence. His voice felt too loud in the small, confined space, but he pushed on. "We've escaped the worst of it." Amara didn't look at him, her eyes still locked on the distant stars. "Safe," she echoed quietly, as though she were thinking aloud. "You think we're safe?" Ryan felt a chill at her words, her tone laced with something that made his gut tighten. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously. She turned to him then, her violet eyes piercing through the darkness of the shuttle. "You may have escaped the battlefield, Captain Ryan, but you haven't escaped the true danger. Not yet." Ryan furrowed his brow, confusion clouding his thoughts. He had seen the warbots, the enemy forces, and he knew they were powerful. But something about Amara's words unsettled him. "You're saying there's more out there? More threats?" "Much more," she replied, her voice low and serious. "My people, the Zenthia, We have enemies. Powerful enemies. And now that I'm no longer in Zerinthia's protection, the threat to your people is greater than you realize." Ryan didn't know what to say to that. The situation had become far more complex than he could have imagined. He was a soldier, used to fighting on the front lines, but this wasn't just a military campaign. It was a political game, one that Ryan had no experience playing. Princess Amara was right. The enemies they faced weren't just on the battlefield. They were hidden in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As if to confirm her words, an alarm suddenly blared throughout the shuttle, interrupting their conversation. Ryan's heart skipped a beat as his instincts kicked in. He jumped to his feet, grabbing his weapon, his mind already racing through possible threats. "Report," he barked into the comm system. "This is Lieutenant Thompson," came the crackling voice. "We've detected a fleet on our radar, closing in fast. They're not Zerinthian, Captain. They're different." Ryan's pulse quickened. Different. That didn't sound good. "How many ships?" "5, maybe 6, Thompson replied. "They're using cloaking technology. We won't see them until they're on top of us." Cloaking technology. Ryan had encountered cloaked ships before, but the enemies he had fought in the past had never used such advanced tech. The sheer precision and secrecy of this enemy was enough to make his stomach churn. They weren't just dealing with typical foes. They were up against a threat that had the ability to disappear in the vastness of space, to strike without warning. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Ryan ordered, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "And get me a visual on those ships. Now." Amara stood up as well, her eyes now sharp with concern. "They found us," she said, her voice laced with certainty. "I knew it wouldn't take long." Ryan shot her a questioning glance. "Who are they?" "Enemies," she replied simply. "They've been hunting my family for generations. You've heard of the Rheloth." Ryan paused, his mind working to place the name. The Rheloth, a powerful faction of mercenaries, rumored to be merciless, skilled in the art of assassination and sabotage. They had been known to wipe out entire civilizations if it served their interests. If they were after Amara, this was no ordinary threat. They didn't just want her. They wanted her dead, and they would stop at nothing to get to her. "Get ready," Ryan said grimly, his mind racing. "We've got to fight them off." He could feel the weight of responsibility bearing down on him, the pressure mounting with each passing second. He was not just a soldier anymore. He was a protector, not just of his people, but now of a princess, one who was as dangerous as she was royal. And this wasn't just a simple mission. The Rheloth were skilled, and they had resources beyond what Ryan could ever have imagined. The stakes had just escalated to a level he wasn't sure he was prepared for. Amara stepped closer to him, her gaze locked on the stars outside the window, as though she were reading the silent messages in the vast expanse of space. "You don't understand," she said softly. "The Rheloth are relentless. They won't stop until they have me, and anyone who stands in their way will be wiped out. That includes you, human." Ryan's throat tightened at her words. He had faced the enemy before, but never anything like this. The Rheloth were not just mercenaries. They were predators, and they played a long, dangerous game. They wouldn't just show up in force. They would infiltrate, destroy from within, and make sure their target never saw them coming. The shuttle shook suddenly as an explosion rocked its side. Sparks flew from the walls, and the lights flickered. Ryan instinctively dropped to a crouch, his hand gripping his weapon tightly. "Thompson," he shouted into the comms, his voice sharp with urgency. "Where's that visual? We need to know exactly where they are." "We've got visual now, Captain," Thompson replied, his voice strained. "They're coming in fast. 4 ships, cloaked. 2 directly ahead, 2 behind us. We're surrounded." Ryan's stomach sank. They had no way of escaping, no way to outrun them. The only option now was to fight, to stand their ground and hope they could survive long enough to get reinforcements. But that wasn't guaranteed. The Rheloth weren't just attacking for sport. They were after something far more important than just killing a few soldiers. Amara, now beside him, turned to face him, her expression resolute. "This is no longer your fight, Captain," she said softly. "The Rheloth won't stop at anything to get what they want. You don't understand the depths of their reach." Ryan shook his head, his voice low. "No, I understand, and I'm not walking away from this. Not now." The shuttle rocked again, the sound of a distant explosion rumbling through the walls. Ryan could feel the pressure mounting, the heat of the moment searing through his veins. He was up against an enemy he didn't fully understand, one with the resources to hunt him across the stars. The only thing he knew for sure was that they weren't getting out of this easily, and for the first time in his life, he didn't know if they were going to survive. "Hold on," Ryan growled, a fierce determination in his eyes. "We're not going down without a fight." The shuttle's interior was filled with the sounds of alarms, the rumble of the explosions reverberating through the walls as the Rheloth closed in. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest as he gripped the controls, his knuckles white. His eyes darted across the screens, watching as enemy ships appeared and disappeared in the space around them, cloaked and deadly. The Rheloth were masters of this, moving in the shadows, taking advantage of every opening, and striking with ruthless precision. He could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of his responsibility for Amara, and the rest of the crew bearing down on him. But there was something else too, a feeling deep in his gut that wasn't just about duty or survival. It was about her. The princess, the woman who had changed everything for him, was right beside him, fighting alongside him. And despite everything that was happening, despite the terror of being hunted through the stars, he couldn't help but feel a strange, undeniable connection with her. She was no longer just the princess of a distant planet. She was someone he cared about deeply. "Hold on," Ryan shouted, twisting the shuttle's controls as the ship veered sharply to the left, narrowly avoiding a blast from one of the enemy ships. He could hear the hum of the engines working at maximum power, pushing them to the edge of their limits. But it wasn't enough. The Rheloth were too skilled, too organized. They were closing in fast, and soon there would be nowhere to run. Amara's voice cut through the chaos, calm but full of urgency. "You need to fight back, Ryan. Don't let them corner us." Ryan shot her a glance, her eyes locked onto him with an intensity that matched his own. She wasn't just a helpless princess anymore. She was a warrior in her own right. The way she spoke, the way she carried herself, all of it told him that she was no stranger to battles like this. She had fought wars before, and now she was in the fight for her life. "I'm not backing down," Ryan gritted through his teeth, his fingers tightening on the controls. He knew he couldn't do this alone. They needed to work together if they were going to survive this. He turned to the crew behind him, his voice commanding and steady. "Prepare the weapons systems. We're going to hit them before they get too close." The crew sprang into action, and in a matter of seconds, the shuttle's weapons systems powered up. Ryan could feel the hum of the energy weapons as they charged, ready to fire. But even as they prepared for their counterattack, the feeling of dread only grew stronger. The Rheloth were cunning, and their cloaking technology was unmatched. They could be anywhere, and at any moment, they could strike. Ryan was already formulating a plan, but he knew they didn't have much time. He needed to get them out of here, alive, and he needed Amara's help. "We're going to need a distraction," he said, turning to her. "Something that'll pull their attention long enough for us to break free." Amara didn't hesitate. "Leave that to me," she said, her voice steady and full of resolve. She turned toward the back of the shuttle, where the crew was working to arm the weapons. Ryan watched her go, a knot of both admiration and concern twisting in his stomach. She wasn't just a princess. She was a force to be reckoned with. But as he thought about it, he realized that the true strength she had wasn't in her ability to command armies or wield weapons. It was in the fire that burned within her. The same fire that kept her fighting, no matter the odds. The same fire that had drawn him to her in the first place. His thoughts were cut short as a blast shook the shuttle, rattling him in his seat. The hull creaked under the strain, and the shuttle veered violently to the right. Ryan swore under his breath, twisting the controls to steady the ship. The Rheloth were closing in faster than he had anticipated. He could almost feel their presence, the threat of their ships looming in the darkness. "Ryan!" Amara's voice rang out from behind him. He turned to see her reappearing in the cockpit, holding something in her hand. It was a small device, sleek and unfamiliar. "This will help us," she said, her voice confident. She had a fierce look in her eyes, a fire that mirrored his own determination. "I've used this before. It'll disrupt their cloaking systems long enough for us to take them out." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "How do you know it'll work?" She didn't answer right away, instead moving toward the back of the shuttle. "Trust me," she said, and for some reason he did. He didn't have time to question her. The Rheloth were too close, their cloaked ships now almost directly ahead of them. If they didn't act fast, it would be too late. Ryan punched the comms button again. "All crew, brace for impact. We're going in hot. Get ready to fire on my mark." The crew acknowledged, their voices sharp with the same urgency that Ryan felt. His hands were steady, despite the chaos around them, as he prepared for the fight of his life. He could see the enemy ships now, faint outlines in the darkness, still hidden behind their cloaks, but unmistakably there. And then, without warning, Amara sprang into action. She activated the device, and a surge of energy rippled through the shuttle. The cloaking technology of the Rheloth ships flickered for just a moment, just long enough for Ryan to lock onto their coordinates. "Now!" Ryan shouted, his voice filled with urgency. The shuttle's weapons fired in quick succession, powerful beams of energy lighting up the void as they tore through the cloaked ships. One by one, the Rheloth ships began to decloak, their outlines becoming clear as their systems struggled to keep up with the disruption. Ryan didn't hesitate. He fired again, watching as one of the enemy ships erupted in a ball of flames. The explosion was deafening, and for a moment, the stars outside seemed to flicker with the intensity of the blast. But there was no time to savor the victory. The remaining Rheloth ships were quick to retaliate, launching their own barrage of energy blasts. Ryan jerked the shuttle to the side, narrowly avoiding a hit, but the ship shuddered as another explosion rattled its hull. Amara's voice rang out once again, this time filled with fierce determination. "We're not finished yet. We need to take them all down." Ryan's mind raced. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Rheloth were relentless, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But as Ryan looked over at Amara, standing beside him, her eyes filled with the same fierce determination, he knew one thing for sure. They weren't going down without a fight. They were in this together. With renewed resolve, Ryan focused on the task at hand, firing again. The shuttle surged forward, weapons blazing as they engaged the remaining enemy ships. The battle raged on, the stakes higher than ever. But through it all, one thing remained clear. The bond between them had been forged in the heat of battle, a bond that neither of them could ignore, no matter what happened next. For the first time, Ryan felt a connection to something bigger than himself. And as the battle raged on around them, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The shuttle rocked violently as another barrage of energy blasts slammed into its hull. Ryan gripped the controls with white-knuckled force, his eyes scanning the flashing warning signs on the screen. Sparks flew from the console as one of the ship's power cells began to overload, the warning alarm blaring in his ears. Amara was beside him, her face set in a mask of determination, but even she couldn't hide the tension in her eyes. They were running out of time, and the Rheloth were relentless. "They're closing in," Ryan shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. He flicked a switch, activating the ship's emergency boosters. The shuttle lurched forward, narrowly avoiding another wave of enemy fire. But they couldn't keep running forever. They needed a plan. Amara's voice cut through the chaos, steady and resolute. "We're not running, Ran. It's time to fight. We have to face them, or we'll never be free." Her words resonated deep within him. She was right. They had been running, hiding, hoping for an escape that wouldn't come. But the truth was, there was no escape from the Rheloth. No matter how much they tried to avoid them, no matter how many times they thought they had shaken them off, the enemy always found a way to catch up. And every time they did, the stakes were higher. Every time, the danger grew more real. Ryan's gaze hardened as he stared out into the inky blackness of space. The Rheloth ships were closing in faster than ever, their weapons primed and ready to strike. He could see them now, the sleek, deadly silhouettes of their advanced vessels. The Rheloth were like ghosts, silent, invisible, until they decided to make themselves known with a devastating blast. They were the ultimate predators, and humans had been nothing more than prey to them for far too long. But not anymore. Amara was right. They had to face the Rheloth head-on. There was no turning back now. No more hiding, no more running. If they were going to survive, they would have to fight for it. "Prepare to engage," Ryan said, his voice low and full of resolve. He turned to his crew, his gaze locking onto each of them in turn. "This is it. We stand our ground here and now. No more retreating." The crew nodded grimly, knowing what was at stake. They had all been through too much together to back down now. They were a family, bound by the struggle for survival, and they would fight as one. Ryan glanced at Amara, her expression fierce as she stood beside him, her hand steady on the controls. She was no longer just the princess of a far-off world. She was a warrior, someone who had been through hell and come out the other side, stronger than ever. The bond between them had grown deeper with each passing moment. And now, in the face of the Rheloth, that bond was more than just a shared survival instinct. It was a shared purpose, a purpose to defeat the evil that threatened not just their lives, but the entire galaxy. "On my mark," Ryan said, his voice tight with focus. "We hit them with everything we've got. No holding back." Amara nodded, her lips pressing together in a determined line. "Understood." Ryan didn't wait any longer. He slammed the button, unleashing a wave of energy blasts from the shuttle's weapon systems. The bright beams of light tore through the darkness, striking one of the Rheloth ships with devastating force. The explosion lit up the vast expanse of space, the shockwave rippling outward. For a moment, the Rheloth ship vanished in the fiery brilliance of the blast. But there were more. Ryan's eyes flicked over the redouts. The other ships were still closing in. This was only the beginning. "Incoming," one of the crew members shouted, his voice filled with panic. A wave of enemy fire swept toward them, the energy blasts leaving trails of light in their wake. Ryan jerked the controls hard to the left, narrowly avoiding the blasts. The shuttle shuddered as one of the shots grazed the outer hull, sparks flying from the damage. They were running out of time. They couldn't keep dodging forever. Amara's voice was calm but unwavering. "We need to disable their cloaking technology. Without it, they'll be easier to target." Ryan's heart skipped a beat. "How?" "I've been studying their systems," she replied, her fingers flying over the console. "I know how their cloaks work. We just need to hit the right frequency, and it'll disrupt their entire fleet." Ryan's eyes widened as he realized what she was proposing. If they could disable the Rheloth cloaking technology, they would have the upper hand. The playing field would be leveled, and the enemy's most dangerous advantage would be gone. But it was a risky move. They would be exposed, vulnerable. The Rheloth would see them coming, and they would retaliate with everything they had. "It's a gamble," Ryan said, his voice tight with tension. "I'm willing to take it," Amara replied, her gaze never wavering. Ryan's lips pressed into a hard line. He trusted her. He had to. Do it. His thoughts were cut short as a blast shook the shuttle, rattling him in his seat. The hull creaked under the strain, and the shuttle veered violently to the right. Ryan swore under his breath. twisting the controls to steady the ship. The Rheloth were closing in faster than he had anticipated. He could almost feel their presence, the threat of their ships looming in the darkness. "Ryan!" Amara's voice rang out from behind him. He turned to see her reappearing in the cockpit, holding something in her hand. It was a small device, sleek and unfamiliar. "This will help us," she said, her voice confident. She had a fierce look in her eyes, a fire that mirrored his own determination. "I've used this before. It'll disrupt their cloaking systems long enough for us to take them out." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "How do you know it'll work?" She didn't answer right away, instead moving toward the back of the shuttle. "Trust me," she said, and for some reason he did. He didn't have time to question her. The Rheloth were too close, their cloaked ships now almost directly ahead of them. If they didn't act fast, it would be too late. Ryan punched the comms button again. "All crew, brace for impact. We're going in hot. Get ready to fire on my mark." The crew acknowledged, their voices sharp with the same urgency that Ryan felt. His hands were steady, despite the chaos around them, as he prepared for the fight of his life. He could see the enemy ships now, faint outlines in the darkness, still hidden behind their cloaks, but unmistakably there. And then, without warning, Amara sprang into action. She activated the device, and a surge of energy rippled through the shuttle. The cloaking technology of the Rheloth ships flickered for just a moment, just long enough for Ryan to lock onto their coordinates. "Now!" Ryan shouted, his voice filled with urgency. The shuttle's weapons fired in quick succession, powerful beams of energy lighting up the void as they tore through the cloaked ships. One by one, the Rheloth ships began to decloak, their outlines becoming clear as their systems struggled to keep up with the disruption. Ryan didn't hesitate. He fired again, watching as one of the enemy ships erupted in a ball of flames. The explosion was deafening, and for a moment, the stars outside seemed to flicker with the intensity of the blast. But there was no time to savor the victory. The remaining Rheloth ships were quick to retaliate, launching their own barrage of energy blasts. Ryan jerked the shuttle to the side, narrowly avoiding a hit, but the ship shuddered as another explosion rattled its hull. Amara's voice rang out once again, this time filled with fierce determination. "We're not finished yet. We need to take them all down." Ryan's mind raced. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Rheloth were relentless, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But as Ryan looked over at Amara, standing beside him, her eyes filled with the same fierce determination, he knew one thing for sure. They weren't going down without a fight. They were in this together. With renewed resolve, Ryan focused on the task at hand, firing again. The shuttle surged forward, weapons blazing as they engaged the remaining enemy ships. The battle raged on, the stakes higher than ever. But through it all, one thing remained clear. The bond between them had been forged in the heat of battle, a bond that neither of them could ignore, no matter what happened next. For the first time, Ryan felt a connection to something bigger than himself. And as the battle raged on around them, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The shuttle rocked violently as another barrage of energy blasts slammed into its hull. Ryan gripped the controls with white-knuckled force, his eyes scanning the flashing warning signs on the screen. Sparks flew from the console as one of the ship's power cells began to overload, the warning alarm blaring in his ears. Amara was beside him, her face set in a mask of determination, but even she couldn't hide the tension in her eyes. They were running out of time, and the Rheloth were relentless. "They're closing in," Ryan shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. He flicked a switch, activating the ship's emergency boosters. The shuttle lurched forward, narrowly avoiding another wave of enemy fire. But they couldn't keep running forever. They needed a plan. Amara's voice cut through the chaos, steady and resolute. "We're not running, Ryan. It's time." With a deep breath, Amara activated the device, sending a pulse of energy toward the enemy fleet. The shuttle shook violently as the pulse emanated from them, and Ryan could hear the hum of the ship's systems straining under the pressure. For a moment, everything went still. The Rheloth ships froze, their cloaking technology flickering in and out. Then, one by one, the enemy vessels decloaked, their dark silhouettes becoming visible once more. Ryan didn't hesitate. He fired. The first Rheloth ship exploded in a blinding flash, its debris scattering in all directions. Ryan barely had time to process the victory before he was forced to pull the shuttle into a hard turn, dodging another barrage of incoming fire. But they weren't finished yet. More ships came at them, their weapons firing relentlessly, determined to destroy them. Ryan's hands were a blur on the controls as he engaged the shuttle's evasive maneuvers, but the Rheloth weren't backing down. They had one goal: obliterate them, end their defiance. Amara was beside him, her eyes fierce as she monitored the systems. "We need to take out their command ship," she said. "It's the heart of their fleet. If we can destroy it, the rest will fall apart." Ryan's heart hammered in his chest. The command ship was massive, well-armed, heavily shielded. Taking it down would be no easy task. But if they didn't, they would never defeat the Rheloth. "Can you get a lock on it?" he asked. Amara nodded, her fingers dancing over the console. "I can do it." Ryan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. This was the moment that would decide everything. It was now or never. With a steady hand, Ryan directed the shuttle toward the command ship. The Rheloth fired everything they had, but they couldn't stop them. As they closed in on their target, Ryan pressed the button, unleashing a final barrage of weapons. The energy blasts hit their mark, tearing through the command ship shields and into its core. The explosion was deafening, a bright flash that lit up the entire battlefield. For a moment, the universe seemed to pause. And then, as the dust settled, Ryan realized it was over. The Rheloth fleet was destroyed. They had won. Ryan exhaled, his body sagging with relief. He turned to look at Amara, her face flushed with exhaustion, but her eyes alive with triumph. They had done it. Against all odds, they had defeated the Rheloth. The galaxy was safe, for now. And in that moment, Ryan knew that this victory wasn't just about survival. It was about something deeper. It was about the bond they had forged, the strength they had found in each other. Together, they had faced the darkness, and together, they had brought light to the universe. The final battle had been fought, and humanity had triumphed. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something greater. As the shuttle drifted through the stars, Ryan and Amara stood side by side, ready for whatever came next. The silence in the aftermath of the battle was deafening. The stars, once bright and full of chaos, now appeared to hang in peaceful stillness. The shuttle drifted slowly through the void, its engines barely humming, the energy around it low and calm. Inside, Ryan and Amara sat side by side, both exhausted, both trying to comprehend the enormity of what they had just achieved. The threat was gone. The Rheloth fleet, once a dark shadow threatening to engulf the galaxy, had been obliterated. The galaxy was safe for now. But it wasn't just the battle that had changed everything. It was the bond that had formed between Ryan and Amara, a bond that neither had anticipated but that neither could deny. Ryan leaned back in his seat, his gaze focused on the vastness outside the ship. His thoughts were a whirlwind, thoughts of loss, sacrifice, and a future uncertain. He had always known that being a soldier meant walking a thin line between life and death. But this felt different. This victory, this battle, it had been more than just survival. It had been about fighting for something worth living for. He glanced at Amara, her profile soft in the dim light of the ship's interior. She was tired, her shoulders slumped, but there was a strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She had changed, more than just physically, though she had always been a princess, an alien leader, someone of immense power. Now she was something else. She was someone who had fought, someone who had bled alongside him, and someone who had felt the sting of loss just as he had. Amara turned her head to meet his gaze, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the weight of everything they had been through. "We did it," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly as if the enormity of the moment was only just now sinking in. Ryan nodded, his throat tight. "We did." His voice was rough, raw, like it had been used to shout commands on the battlefield, rather than speak of feelings. The words came slower now, softer. "I couldn't have done it without you." She smiled, but it was a sad smile, a bittersweet expression that spoke of shared grief and triumph. "And I couldn't have done it without you." Ryan swallowed hard. He wanted to say more, but the words felt inadequate. What could he say after everything they had been through? After the endless battles, the close calls, the moments when they had thought they would never make it. How could he express the feelings that were building inside him? It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't just camaraderie. There was something deeper now, something more permanent. They had faced the darkness together and come out the other side. And in the process, they had forged something stronger than mere survival. They had forged a connection. The reality of that connection was something that hit him all at once, like a wave crashing over him. The fight was over, but their journey was far from done. Ryan's heart raced as he turned toward Amara, the realization dawning on him that she had become the person he could never walk away from. Not now. Not after everything. Ryan began, his voice faltering. He cleared his throat, trying again. "Amara, I know this might sound crazy, but after everything we've been through, I can't imagine my life without you." Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, there was a flicker of hesitation in her gaze. But then, her expression softened, and she reached for his hand. "You don't have to," she said, her voice steady now, full of certainty. "Because you're not alone. Not anymore." Ryan felt his chest tighten as she spoke. Her words were exactly what he needed to hear. In that moment, it felt like the whole galaxy had come into focus. Everything else, the fighting, the loss, the fear, had been leading to this. This moment, this connection. "I don't want to be alone," Ryan said, his voice quieter now, softer, as if he was finally letting go of all the weight he had been carrying. He had fought for freedom, for survival, but this was about something different. This was about love. Amara's gaze never wavered as she squeezed his hand. "You won't be," she replied, her voice full of warmth. "I won't let you be alone." Ryan smiled then, a genuine, peaceful smile. He had fought countless battles, seen countless lives lost, but in this moment, as he looked at Amara, he realized something profound. The galaxy might have been vast, and the universe might have been full of dangers, but it was also full of possibilities. He could never have known that in the depths of space, in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, he would find this love, this connection. Their hands remained clasped, the simple touch of fingers intertwined carrying more weight than any weapon ever could. It was a promise that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. As the shuttle continued its slow journey through the stars, Ryan and Amara were no longer just survivors. They were partners, in every sense of the word. They had fought together, built together, and now they would live together. They would rebuild the galaxy in their image, a galaxy of hope, of unity, and of love. The galaxy might have been stunned by their victory, by the fall of the Rheloth, but it was nothing compared to what would come next. They were more than just a soldier and a princess now. They were something that transcended their roles. They were proof that love could survive even in the darkest of times, that love could bring light to the farthest reaches of space. Amara leaned her head on Ryan's shoulder, a soft sigh escaping her lips. Ryan turned slightly to rest his head against hers, and for a moment, they simply sat there, together, letting the silence envelop them. They had fought the greatest battle of their lives, and they had won. But now, there was something even greater to fight for. The future. A future that they would build together. A future where the galaxy would no longer be a place of endless conflict, but a place of peace. They would make it happen. They would make it work. As they drifted through the stars no longer seemed so distant. The darkness that had once felt so overwhelming now seemed like a distant memory. The future was wide open, and Ryan knew that whatever came next, they would face it hand in hand. The love between them had stunned the galaxy, and it was just the beginning.